Quick announcement before we start today. I'm happy to say that we got the likes goal on our DNA test video from last week, so I will now be taking an ancestry DNA test of my own. I'm going to be making a video about it and everything too, probably coming out in the next month or so let's get excited. I know I am. I do have one more favor to ask though to help us get this thing done. I've started a small GoFundMe fundraiser to help us cover the costs of this, so if you have a few extra bucks and you really want to see this new video and what my DNA background is, please consider donating by clicking the link below in the description of this video. Thanks for the donations in advance and thanks for your time today. And now, on to the show. Hello and welcome back to South Park Explained on No Bullshit. Today we've got quite the meta episode to go over. A few days ago, the episode called Basic Cable premiered, and it's filled with references and jokes about not only cable television, but also they talk a lot about streaming services like the newly released Disney Plus one. And they also discuss the new hit Star Wars based TV show The Mandalorian, which appears on there. In fact, even Baby Yoda gets a small reference here today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Things start off with another new intro for this season. This time, the Scott Malkinson character is getting his own show. For those who don't know, Scott started off as just another side character on the South Park show many years ago. First, he was just a one-time joke where the kids would make fun of him for having diabetes. Cartman usually does a little impression of him saying, "I'm Scott Malkinson, I have diabetes." And other people end up doing it in this episode too. But back to Scott's beginning, well, he first was made fun of a little bit on the show, and eventually he began to join the boys on adventures once in a while. And even Scott Malkinson went on to become a pretty significant character in the second South Park video game called Fractured But Whole, in which Scott's superpowers were actually hilariously related to his diabetes. That was like his secret trick. And back to this new episode, well, it's going to be referencing his condition, and they're going to make that a part of everything every chance they can too. Right from the beginning, Scott's intro features graphics of large needles and glucose testers and other references to the boy's sad but very manageable disease. This new intro also gave me some old school cartoon vibes, and also it seemed like they were kind of making it a parody of the Archer show from FX. Scott even holds a weapon up in the ending shot of his intro, much like how Archer does on his own show. There's also a lot of spy-like catchy and smooth music that plays in the background here and throughout the episode too. Usually when Scott goes to get his testing kit out for his diabetes, or when he has to give himself an insulin shot. Seems like the joke here is they're trying to make his diabetes treatments and stuff look way cooler than it actually is. And after Scott's done getting ready here in the beginning, he goes downstairs to have breakfast with his parents. Right away, Scott goes to ask his dad for something he's been wanting for a long time. Scott asks if they can get the new Disney Plus streaming service, but his dad gets very angry and says no. You see, Scott's dad works at and supports the cable company, and he sees all these streaming services popping up as a threat to him and his livelihood. And Scott's dad is right to be worried too, because more people are switching to streaming services and people are dropping cable TV each and every day. The thing is though, most of this is the cable company's own fault, since they are refusing to upgrade their own services and they also won't make their prices more competitive. Not only that, but cable companies are known to have some of the worst customer service out there. This is made fun of by South Park extensively today too, later on in this episode and right here, because later we get to see Scott's dad at work. There he gets a phone call where someone needs their cable fixed pronto, but instead of going straight to work like he said he would, Scott's dad actually makes multiple stops and detours along the way. First getting food, then going to the grocery store and shopping slowly, and even he takes a break to go bowling for a little while. This of course makes fun of how the cable company workers are always late, and also the show goofs on how they always offer these long windows of time where they'll show up. Cable companies never give you a direct appointment. Instead they say they'll be there between noon and 5 p.m. or something. Some ridiculously long window where they expect you to take the whole day off of work just to get your cable turned back on. Meanwhile, during all of this, Scott Malkinson is at school now, and he gets very excited when they introduce a new student to the class. Her name is Sophie Gray, and not only is she the new cute girl in class apparently, but also she ends up sharing that she has diabetes, just like Scott Malkinson. This makes Scott really interested in her right away, and he decides to try and hang out with her or something, despite Cartman warning him that if two people with diabetes hook up and have kids, their offspring will have super diabetes. According according to Cartman's joking logic. Scott moves forward with his pursuit of Sophie anyway, even getting into some pretty good conversation with the new girl already. A problem quickly arises though when they go to make plans because in an effort to impress Sophie and get her to like him, Scott claims that he watches the Mandalorian show too. But his bluff is quickly called when Sophie says they should watch the show together at Scott's house one day when it comes on next. Scott goes along with this, but as we saw from the beginning, he doesn't actually have Disney Plus yet, and with his father being so against it, getting that subscription at his house in time to watch the show with his new friend could be rather problematic. There's also a funny goof on Star Wars itself here when Sophie starts talking about the show and how she loves The Mandalorian, saying it's the best Star Wars thing since Empire, which is short for Empire Strikes Back. And she also says The Mandalorian makes the new Star Wars movies look like dog shit. Not the worst assessment of things in this franchise, that's for sure. And all this Star Wars talk in South Park right here, in what's just happened and what we just described and what's about to happen later too, well, this is all welcomed for sure. Next, Scott Malcolmson goes home and begs his parents to get him Disney Plus so he can have his new friend over to try and impress her. Scott's dad still refuses though, even going off into a rant about how streaming services are supposedly ruining our culture. This is pretty debatable and I think most would say it's off base too, but Scott's dad does make some decent points here. And also, this is where things start to get real meta and self-referential for this episode too. You see, Scott's dad complains that with all these new streaming services, instead of just getting fewer shows that are made much better, like how things were with the older cable TV system, well, now we're getting many more shows, thousands of new ones, many of which are much lower in quality. In addition, the studios are starting to run out of ideas already too, so many of these new shows are just reboots, spin-offs, sequel series, or different versions of other things that already came out. And if you hadn't picked up on the irony yet here, let's go over it. You see, that's also a bit of a jab and a reference to this current spin-off joke that South Park is doing with this Scott Malcolmson episode. And it's also a running theme that's been going on during this whole season. First, we had the Tegrity Farms spin-off for the first half of this year's season, and then we got the PC Baby spin-off, and then a One for the Ladies episode, and now we have the Scott Malcolmson show. All of this year's South Park episodes have been building up to this, so now we can very clearly see what the writers are going for. They're making fun of streaming services broadly, and goofing on the fact that there's so many spin-offs and sequel series being made now in order to fill up the libraries of all these new media websites. This joke comes back later on too, but for now, let's move on to the rest of the plot. After the Disney Plus argument finishes, Scott's dad then gets really pissed off, and he goes on to call on all of his cable company co-workers, saying they need to finally come up with a way to take down all of these streaming services once and for all. He sets up a meeting hastily on the phone here, but he still can't help but say their meeting time will be between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. on Thursday, again making fun of how cable guys can never seem to set a real appointment time, even when they're doing something on their own off the clock. And also, while we're talking about it again, why the hell do these guys do this all the time anyway? Is it really that hard for the cable companies to say, hey, we're going to come by at 3 p.m. to install your cable on Friday? I know they want to leave themselves a window and room to be late or something and what have you, but it still makes them look lazy and incompetent, and it further shows that cable companies don't give a shit about wasting their customers' time. Next, the cable guys get themselves really pumped up and they start a plan to stop the town's internet so that people can't watch their streaming services anymore. The cable guys split up and plan to get supplies and then meet up again later at the breaker between 4 and 7 p.m. And here's where we get another funny montage where the cable guys waste their time all day going around town doing errands and other unrelated stuff when they should be working or doing their plan. One guy goes to see a doctor, others go to watch a movie at the theater, and there's even one guy who goes to a tanning salon. This of course furthers that joke from before, and it just goes to show that even when these cable guys are working on something personal and something they're passionate about, they still waste time and do whatever the hell they want. This also plays into what I said before about these cable companies. They really deserve to become obsolete, especially considering they've had years to try and fix things and try and learn to do better and offer better deals with more reasonable appointment times, but they just refuse to change or evolve at all, so it kind of makes it really hard to pity them as they go the way of the dinosaurs. Next, there's a quick but very funny section where we see South Park make their own new streaming service called Canada Plus, or as they say it, Canada Plus, which is how it's said with their joke Canadian accent. This bit is obviously a goof on Disney Plus specifically, but it's also just a gag on how many different varying streaming services have come out in recent years in America and the world. As for Canada Plus specifically, they appear to only have 2 shows, one being the classic South Park show within a show called called Terrence and Phillip, and the other show being a spin-off of that one. This part might happen fast too, but if you're paying attention and keeping up with this video here, this bit can be seen as quite meta too, since Terrence and Phillip is a show within South Park, and it's a spin-off of it too, and it also has its own spin-off on Canada Plus. And this is exactly the kind of bottom-of-the-barrel, simple and easy show ideas that Scott Malkinson's dad was chastising earlier, and as it turns out, Cartman was the one watching Canada Plus. But he quickly gets interrupted when Scott knocks on his door because Scott wants Eric to help him get Disney Plus for himself, which he can't do because his parents said no and he doesn't have a credit card either. Cartman first refuses to help Scott, but he convinces him by saying Eric once had a girlfriend himself too, so Cartman should know what it's like to like a girl. And Cartman's girlfriend is of course a reference to his ex-partner Heidi, who became a pretty main character on this show too for the last couple of seasons, but she has yet to appear much at all this year. Cartman reluctantly agrees to help Scott then after this revelation, saying he knows a way that he can get Disney Plus without a credit card. Scott goes on to buy a black market subscription to Disney Plus so that he can have a successful date with Sophie. But in the end, Scott's dad and his cable guy colleagues, they vandalize the cable lines running through town, which makes Scott's account stop working when they're trying to watch The Mandalorian. Sophie then suggests they go and watch it at Jimmy Vollmer's house instead, because that's where their other classmates are gathered to watch the show. But Scott worries they may threaten his attempts to woo Sophie for himself. And as it turns out, Jimmy's streaming service also malfunctions then too, as do those of everyone else in town. Then when the boys attempt to ingratiate themselves with Sophie on their own, Scott decides to threaten them all with some hypodermic needles which he is now brandishing as weapons, warning the other boys to stay away from his new girlfriend. Sophie, however, informs Scott that having diabetes does not make her his girlfriend, as she is more than just that condition. This prompts a dejected Scott to retreat to the playground to mope, but a sympathetic Sophie follows him there to discuss things and commiserate over him and her both having difficulties with diabetes, a condition they live with each day. She then tells him that she is glad she now has a friend that understands these issues, and that even though she missed the latest episode of The Mandalorian, she somewhat likes the new Scott Malkinson show. And before we get to the final title card and gag, let's first talk about the brief but very funny appearance of Baby Yoda here. When they first tried to watch The Mandalorian show at Scott's house, Baby Yoda comes on screen for a few seconds, showing a quick shot of him holding a little cup right before the whole thing cuts off and the internet is turned off by the cable guys. This quick shot of Baby Yoda is short, but it's also funny as hell because, well, not much really happens, but they get real excited about it anyway. All it really shows is a shot of Baby Yoda sipping out of some cup in a slow, kind of still way. And this is reminiscent of a similar shot from the actual show. Sophie freaks out about this modest shot anyway though, and it's kind of like how everyone in the real world is so stoked about Baby Yoda, even though he really hasn't done much yet. And don't get me wrong here, I love the little guy too, but I also can identify with this joke since a lot of the hype and excitement about this character can seem overblown, and most of the love for Baby Yoda actually comes from the nostalgia about the old Star Wars things. The old Star Wars themes and characters like the actual Yoda or Boba Fett, who both have new successors on the new Mandalorian show. At the end of this episode, coming full circle, a closing title card informs the viewers that the streaming rights for the Scott Malkinson show are now available, even listing an actual phone number which prospective buyers can contact Trey Parker at, one of the creators and leading minds behind this whole South Park show. This of course is a joke, and if you call that number, it has a little joke message from Trey too. And this last bit is not only hilarious, but also it's another gag that's just as self-referential and meta as it gets here. You see, not only are the South Park guys going one step further with that whole making fun of all the sequels and spin-off series that are on streaming services now, and in addition to that, this also references the fact that the South Park show itself also just sold and transferred its own streaming rights to another new and upcoming streaming service, HBO Max. South Park had previously been on Hulu for years, but now, back in October, HBO Max just bought the streaming rights for the show for $500 million. So I guess with all that in mind, Trey Parker and the South Park team thought, why not try their hands at another show and try and sell it and the streaming rights to it so they can strike here while the iron's hot, or at least they can make a good joke about things and note how their own show is just as involved in these streaming wars as everyone else. What do you guys think? Did you like the Scott Malkinson show? Are you a fan of this new season of South Park so far? There's only one more episode left this year, so what do you guys think the show will cover next? Comment your thoughts on everything below, and thanks for watching No Bullshit. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, and we'll see y'all next time.